Hello there, and welcome to my channel. If you're a returning viewer, welcome back. I love your face. If you're new here, welcome, sit back, relax, and have a good time. My name is Nos, and today, we're taking a look at Anbernic's RG552. I am a big fan of Anbernic's RG351 line of handhelds, so it was no surprise that I was really excited to get my hands on this newer model. It's bigger, more powerful, and more importantly, it has this really nice screen. On the front of this device, we get 2 joysticks, 4 phase buttons, a D-pad, a start and select button, and finally, this really big screen. If we go ahead and rotate this thing just a little bit, at the bottom we'll find 2 speakers, a reset button, a function button, and 2 SD card slots. Well, micro SD card slots. One for your firmware, and another one for your games. On each side of the device, you'll also find the power button and a volume rocker. At the top of the device, you'll find the usual Anbernic shoulder buttons, L1, L2, R1, and R2. A big ventilation hole for the fan, an HDMI port, a headphone jack, and 2 USB-C ports. And here's what the back looks like as well, just in case you were curious. Okay, but how does it feel? Well, first of all, the device's build quality feels great. You pick this thing up and you know Anbernic made this. It's good quality plastic, there's some weight to it, and it feels pretty good in your hands. The joysticks are pretty common Nintendo Switch joysticks, they work just fine and they click for L3 and R3 inputs. The D-pad is the usual Anbernic fare, even though I feel like it's not as good as it was on previous devices like the RG351. It also tends to register diagonal inputs that I've never tried to input in the first place, but there's a possibility that it's just me being bad, so I don't know. The phase buttons are also what you would expect from Anbernic, and I really have nothing to say about them. They're just great. Same thing for the start and select here, I really have no comments. The shoulder buttons, however, are, for better or for worse, the usual Anbernic fare. They're not necessarily bad, but at this point we've seen other devices come out with Nintendo Switch style stacked shoulder buttons, and given the size of this device, I feel like there is no excuse to use this style of shoulder button. It doesn't help that the size of this device combined with the button layout can make using these shoulder buttons super uncomfortable. For example, I was trying to play Banjo-Kazooie here, and pulling off some of the moves here was so uncomfortable that I just had to give up. It's just not good. I'd also like to mention the reset and function button here at the bottom. I've seen many people complain about where they are and the fact that they are too close to each other. I never personally had an issue with them, but it's worth mentioning that many people tend to reset when they want to press the function button. Personally, I had way more issues with accidentally putting the console to sleep because the power button is right there under my hand while I'm playing. Feels like quite the oversight by Anbernic here. Okay, obviously I have a few complaints about this device, but overall the physical device is pretty good. But what about performance? This is going to be split into 2 parts because this device can dual boot. By removing the micro SD card dedicated to your firmware, you can boot the device into Android, which opens the door to a bunch of emulators we wouldn't get in Emulation Station. So we're gonna start with the Linux-based firmware, and then we'll move on to Android. You're not gonna see it here because I already replaced it, but my first complaint would be the stock firmware that ships with the RG552. It's just not configured very well, and I highly recommend installing another firmware as soon as you can. I am running Amber Elec here, and it's a much better experience. The RG552 runs a better chip than the RG351 line of handhelds, so obviously it's gonna run everything up to PS1 without breaking a sweat. And really, that's all you should be running on the Linux side of things. 3D stuff is just much better on Android. However, what I want you to see is how great the screen on the RG552 really is. With a resolution of 1920 by 1152, it lets you upscale games perfectly into some of the most gorgeous pixels I have ever seen. The extra horsepower of the RK3399 chip also lets you add a few extra filters and post-processing on your games that makes them look just a little bit greater. I feel like GBA shines the brightest here on this big screen, and it just feels like a match made in heaven. I cannot overstate how great GBA looks on the RG552. But like I mentioned earlier, if we move to more 3D stuff like N64, it kinda works, but it's far from perfect. Same thing with Dreamcast. So my recommendation would be to stick to Android for anything past PS1. That being said, let's move on to Android. Booting into Android is as easy as shutting down the device, removing the firmware's micro SD card, and then rebooting the device. It will automatically boot into Android. Now, again, the stock version of Android that comes packaged with the RG552 is absolute garbage. So I am running a custom build of Android 9 published by Black Seraph. Seriously, this is the second time that I mentioned Black Seraph in one of these videos, so please consider supporting them by throwing a few bucks to their Patreon. Black Seraph is doing God's work for the retro handheld community. Now, obviously on Android you can do all of the Android things like get Google Play Store games, remote play, and all that jazz. It's unfortunate that for remote play, the device only supports 2.4 GHz Wi-Fi, which doesn't make the device as viable for remote play as I wish it would be. To be fair, what you're probably going to do the most here is play a few emulators that run much better on Android than they do on Linux. Stuff like Dreamcast here runs so much better. I am running Soul Calibur and Redream here at full speed. I even tried upscaling it a little bit and it still ran almost perfectly. Still much better than in Ember Elec. N64 is a bit of the same as well. Stuff just runs better in Mupen 64, but you unfortunately still need to tweak things here and there, like change your profile and everything. I had to switch from Glide N64 to Glide 64 for a few games. It's all very minor stuff. For these next few tests, I must admit I didn't have much hope. I also didn't buy this device with these systems in mind, but for the sake of the video, I thought it would be good to test them. So I tested GameCube real quick, and the result weren't great. I tried Fantasy Star Online in Dolphin MMJR and got this result. Then I tested it again in the regular release of Dolphin just in case, and I got pretty much the same thing. I didn't test much more for the GameCube since the only game I really care about here is PSO, and needless to say that it isn't playable. I'm sure someone will tell me I could have changed like 17 different settings here in the comments to make it run, but honestly, I'm the type of guy that needs stuff to run consistently to consider it a viable option. I don't want to have to tweak settings every time I boot a game in hopes that it runs well, and at that point I'll just unpack my GameCube, you know? So next, I tested PS2 using Ether SX2, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that Super Robot Tyson almost ran properly on it, like, it was almost full speed. So I tested Need for Speed, and nope. To be fair, that's pretty much what I expected here, so I'm not too shocked about this, but look at this, it's unplayable. There are probably other systems I could have tested, but there's just so many systems out there, and I'm mostly interested in stuff from SNES until the N64 at most. So for me, this turned out pretty good. Things aren't always perfect when you get to N64, but for the most part, it's a great experience. However, I cannot recommend buying the RG552, not in the market it released in. Sure, it is my favorite device right now, but I'm pretty sure this will be short-lived. Funny thing is, I kept telling myself that I had to get this review done before I got my Odin in the mail, and I kept procrastinating, and now my Odin shipped last week, and I'm sure it will dethrone the RG552 without breaking a sweat. The problem with the RG552 is its price. At $310 Canadian, I expect a lot more performance than what we're getting with this one. For comparison, the Retroid Pocket 2 Plus is $100, and it can run a good chunk of the GameCube catalog. Sure, you don't get the gorgeous screen or the size of the RG552, but it's $100. Speaking of size, let me compare the RG552 to a few things I have lying around. Here it is next to the RG351M, a Nintendo Switch OLED, and finally, a PlayStation Vita. Okay, I think I'm done rambling about this little device. My recommendation to you is skip this one and save up just a little more. With just a few extra dollars, you can order yourself an Odin or Odin Lite. I think actually the Odin Lite is cheaper. The RG552 ships with not one, but two underwhelming OSs. It is riddled with small but annoying design oversights, but honestly, I wouldn't blame you for ignoring my recommendation to get your hands on one of the prettiest screens on the market. And on that note, this is Nos Syndrome signing off, and I will see you next time. I love your face.